The station floated above a gas giant that was the color of an old bruise, purple and gray and slow, turning like something that had forgotten where it was going. Commander Nate Carver stood at the observation glass for a moment, looked at it, and then walked into the meeting hall and sat down. The table inside the Galactic conclave was wide enough to land a small ship on. It was made from something pale and smooth that looked like stone but felt different when you put your hand on it. Around it sat 17 species, each with a small translator device humming near their ear, each watching the others with the careful, measuring attention of beings who had been doing this for a very long time. Humanity has been doing it for 11 years. Nate sat one seat behind Ambassador Lena Adler, who was already in position, already smiling. Lena had two kinds of smiles. One was real. It reached her eyes. It happened when something genuinely surprised her or pleased her, and it was rare. The other lived on her face at places like this. Smooth, steady, saying nothing at all. She was wearing that one now. Admiral Yusuf Crane sat further back. He had the quality that old military men sometimes develop, a way of sitting in a chair that makes the chair seem like it belongs to him. He wasn't looking at anyone in particular. He was watching everything at once. Nate put his earpiece in and let the translation feed start. Trade routes, access corridors, boundary lines in the Orion sector. The kind of talk that sounded important and moved at the speed of cold water running downhill. He had sat through 4 of these summits. They always felt the same. The other species spoke in long, careful sentences full of phrases like, as previously established, and, in accordance with agreed protocol. They performed diplomacy at each other the way some people perform at a dinner party, not to communicate exactly, but to demonstrate that they knew how to behave in the right rooms. The human delegation listened and nodded and signed things when Lena gave the small signal. That was what 11 years looked like. 11 years of being the newest species at the table. 11 years of being watched the way you watch something unfamiliar, not with fear, not with respect, but with a kind of patient attention. Like watching a dog that hasn't done anything yet. Waiting to see what it does. Vreth of the Kthar Al spoke next. He was large. Most of the Kthar Al were large, blue-gray, built from something that looked like packed cartilage, folded now into a chair that seemed slightly too small for him. His translator was the flat kind, the kind that stripped every word of warmth or music and delivered it in the voice of a bored administrator. He raised one of his upper limbs and interrupted a clause about patrol rights, which was something you were technically not supposed to do at the conclave table. The Kthar Al had been members for 400 years. They did what they wanted. We should note, Vreth said, for the record, that the human fleet's threat posture is not considered a material factor in our security modeling. The room was quiet. Vreth continued. They are a young species. We do not factor in the barking of young things. Nate did not move. What came next was worse than silence. It was sound from 17 different species in 17 different registers, filtered through 17 translators, all of it meaning the same thing. Laughter. Genuine, easy, room-wide laughter. The Srendi made a high whistling noise. The Vorith rippled the secondary membranes along their necks. Even old Counselor Ian, who usually showed nothing, shifted in his seat in a way that looked like private amusement. Lena's smile went completely still. Not gone. Just empty in a new way. The smile of a person who has had something happen to them in public and has decided not to let the public see the moment it landed. Nate reached for his water glass. He picked it up. He drank from it. He set it down. He did not look at Crane. Crane did not look at him. The session went on for another 2 hours. More clauses. More digital ink. Lena nodded at the right moments and signed the right documents, and the meeting moved at its usual cold water pace until it was over. The delegations filed out into the corridor, which was long and pale and lit with the kind of lighting that made everyone look slightly unwell. A group of Vorith delegates passed Nate on their way out. They were still making sounds among themselves. Still amused by something. He walked to the far end of the corridor where a window looked out over the same gas giant. Still turning. Still purple and gray. Still not in any hurry about anything. He pulled out his comm. He opened a text channel to Crane, not a call, just a message. He typed 4 words, pulled the leash files. The response came back in under a minute. 3 words, you sure about this? Nate looked at the gas giant. He thought about the laughter. Not with anger, something older and quieter than anger. Something that had been sitting still in a deep place for a long time and had just been given a reason to stand up. He typed back, they laughed. Crane's response took longer this time. Almost 2 minutes of nothing on the screen and then 1 word, understood. Nate put the comm back in his pocket. Lena appeared beside him a few minutes later. She stood there without speaking, which was something she did when she was working through something in her head. She was good at that, processing in silence, coming out the other side with a conclusion already shaped. That was intentional, she said. She meant wrath. She meant all of it. Yes, Nate said. He knew exactly what he was saying. Yes. She was quiet again. Then, we're going to respond. Not a question. Already did, he said. She looked at him. He didn't add anything. She looked back at the window and nodded once, slowly, the way you nod when you understand something that you're not entirely sure you wanted to understand. That night, a classified archive that had been sealed since 2381 was quietly opened. The file was called Operation Meridian. It had been built over 9 years by people who had hoped with genuine feeling that it would never be used. The file was large. It transferred slowly even on military bandwidth. When it finished, a single notification reached 7 fleet positions across 4 star systems, each one receiving the same line of text. Meridian is active. No instructions followed. None were needed. The people who received that notification had known for years what it meant. They had built what the file described. They had run the simulations. They had waited. In the dark between star systems, in the deep cold spaces where no conclave sensor was pointed because no conclave sensor had ever had a reason to point there, ships began to move. No lights. No heat. No sound. The gas giant kept turning below the station, slow and indifferent, as if it had already seen how this kind of story goes and had decided long ago not to have an opinion about it. Dr. Karen Vale was eating lunch when her world changed. It was a good lunch. She had made it herself that morning before leaving her apartment, a proper sandwich, not something grabbed from a vending machine, with turkey and too much mustard, the way her father used to make them when she was a child in Tucson. She had been thinking about it since 10 o'clock in the morning. It was 2 o'clock in the afternoon when she finally had time to sit down with it. She had taken 1 bite when the notification appeared on her screen. 1 line. A code she had written herself 6 years ago and filed in a place she had genuinely hoped no living person would ever need to look at. She read it. She set the sandwich down carefully, as if it needed to be treated gently. She did not pick it up again for 6 hours. Admiral Crane's face appeared on the wall screen at 2:15. He did not say hello. Crane did not spend time on greetings when something was happening. He said, "You've seen it." She said, "I've seen it." He said, "How soon can you be ready?" She had already pulled the archive files onto her second screen. "I'm ready now," she told him. The compound below the Rockies had no name on any public document. The building above ground looked like a government office, a flat, plain structure with regular windows and a parking lot with ordinary cars in it. Below it went 3 levels down, and the 3rd level was where Corinne spent most of her working life. She had been there for 4 years. She knew every corridor and every coffee machine and which of the coffee machines actually worked, which was only one of them, the one near the east stairwell. She knew the archive better than she knew her own apartment. She had built it. Her assistant, Lieutenant Pete Dorsey, arrived at her office door at 3 o'clock in the morning looking like he had run from wherever he had been sleeping. He was 26 years old and very good at his job in the way that young people are when they are slightly afraid of making mistakes. He stood in the doorway and said, "What's happening?" "Sit down," she said. "This will take a while." It took most of the night. She walked him through everything. Layer by layer. System by system. The way you explain something important to someone who needs to understand it but has never had reason to think about it before. Here was the thing Karen had understood years before anyone had asked her to put it in writing. Every species in the Galactic Conclave had come from a lineage that was never hunted. The cat al had been the largest creature in the world for 300 million years. The Vorith had no natural predators in their evolutionary history. The Serenthi had developed intelligence not as a tool of survival but as a tool of control. They were smarter than everything else on their planet and they had always known it. Those species built weapons the way beings build things when they have always been the most dangerous thing in any room. Big. Loud. Visible. Made to be seen and feared. Their warships were enormous, impressive things. Their conflicts had formal procedures, declarations of intent, ceremonial warnings, the full performance of power from beings who had never learned to be afraid of being eaten. They did not build for silence. They did not know how. Humanity did. Humans had not been at the top of their food chain for most of their history. They had been medium-sized, slow on their feet, soft in ways that mattered when larger things had teeth. They had survived by being smarter and more patient than the animals that wanted to kill them. They had learned to wait. To watch from a distance. To know their target completely before they moved. To move only once and make it count. That knowledge did not disappear when humanity went to space. It went quiet. It waited. And when humanity took its seat at the conclave table and spent 11 years being looked at the way you look at something that hasn't done anything interesting yet, something very old, and the species woke up and began making plans. The leash files held 47 ships. Not the biggest in the human fleet. Not the most heavily armed. Karen had designed them for one purpose, to be completely undetectable until the moment they chose not to be. It was not cloaking technology. The conclave had cloaking, most of the major species did. This was different. Cloaking was a technological trick. What Karen had built was a behavior. The ships ran cold, producing almost no heat, almost no energy output. They moved in patterns that no conclave sensor had been programmed to flag because those sensors had been designed by species who assumed that anything dangerous would announce itself. The ships did not announce themselves. They simply existed in the dark and waited. The targeting systems were built the same way. Not fast. Certain. Each shot was calculated not for speed, but for absolute accuracy. One shot per target. No second attempts. No wasted energy. The kind of precision that comes from watching and waiting and knowing everything about a target before pulling anything like a trigger. Then there was the network. All 47 ships connected, sharing information at a speed that made them one thing when they needed to be. No commander sending orders down a chain. No delay. Every ship responds to everything all at once, the way a body moves a hand, not because someone decided to move it, but because the moment required it and the whole system responded together. Pete sat across from her when she finished. He was quiet for a long time. He looked at his hands, then at her. "We built all of this," he said. It wasn't quite a question. 9 years, she said. "And nobody used it?" "No." He thought about that. "Why not?" She looked at him. He was young. He had never been the smallest person in a room full of people who had already decided he did not matter. "Because it wasn't time," she said. "And we were hoping it would not stay." He was quiet again. "Then, what changed?" "Someone laughed," she said. "At the wrong people." He nodded slowly. He seemed to understand that this was a complete answer. At the bottom of the archive, below all the technical files and simulation records and engineering schematics, there was one more document. A plain text file. 4 sentences. Corinne had written it on the night she finished the network architecture, sitting at the same desk with a cold cup of coffee, feeling the particular feeling of having just built something she genuinely hoped would gather dust forever. She had written it to whoever would eventually open this folder. She had half forgotten it existed. It said, "If you are reading this, it happened. I built this hoping it would stay on the shelf. I was not naive enough to think it definitely would, which is why I built it properly anyway. I am sorry it came to this, and I am also not sorry, and I think we should be honest about both of those things at the same time." She read it twice. She closed it without showing it to Pete. Then she sent the activation sequence to the 7 fleet positions that had been waiting in silence for 6 years, their crews living their lives around ships they had built and maintained and run simulations on and never once taken into actual use. The notification reached each position in the same second. In the dark between star systems, cold engines warmed by the smallest possible amount, just enough to move, not enough to be noticed. The chorus was awake. It did not announce itself. It never did. Captain Ryan Hollis had not slept more than 5 hours in a row in 11 years, and he had stopped minding it the way you stop minding the sound of a ship's engine. It became part of the background, always there, something you only noticed when it changed. He slept in short windows. 2 hours, sometimes 3. He ate when there was food available and when he remembered to. In between, he watched things. Sensor data on the main screen. The star map on the left. The smaller display on his right that showed him live feeds from the other 46 ships in the chorus, a constant quiet river of information that he had learned over years to read the way fishermen read weather. Not by thinking. By feeling. By a part of the brain that works faster than words. His ship was called the Ardent. The name was printed on the hull, but no one outside the human fleet had ever been close enough to read it. Lieutenant Camille Pruitt was his navigator. She was one of the best he had ever worked with, and she had a particular habit that he had given up trying to understand. She talked to the ship. Not to him. To the ship itself. A low, steady voice, half instruction and half something else, like she was keeping it company. She did this constantly while she worked. Ryan had stopped finding it strange after the first month. The Ardent responded well to her in ways that probably had nothing to do with her talking to it, but he was not interested in testing that theory. They had been in position for 48 hours. 300 kilometers off the port side of the League Cthar warship. Running cold. Running silent. Close enough on the long-range visual feed that Ryan could see the navigation lights of the enemy vessel as small, steady points of color in the dark. The Cthar fleet had 17 ships in the Orion Patrol Corridor. They were large ships, built to be seen, the way everything the Cathay AL built was designed to be seen. Heavy armor. Powerful drives that burned hot and bright. Active sensors pinging out in every direction like a lighthouse that expected the dark to be impressed by it. The fleet commander, Greth 7, a rank, not a name, the Conclave databases had explained, had run this patrol 14 times before. He had never encountered anything he had not expected to encounter. His sensors had never returned an alert that surprised him. This was not because the Orion Corridor was safe. It was because the Cathay AL had spent 400 years as the most powerful military presence in this region of space, and after 400 years, you stop imagining that something might be out there that your sensors cannot see. He was eating when his forward sensors went offline. Not damaged. Not attacked. Just offline. As if something had reached into the system and turned a switch. Ryan watched the Cathay AL fleet's behavior change on his display. The formation loosened slightly. Internal communications flared. He could see the shape of it in their signal patterns, the specific look of a crew that had just encountered something they did not have a word for yet. He let it sit for exactly 90 seconds. Then he said, "Chorus ready." Camille's hands were moving along the navigation console in the light, easy way she had. Without looking up, she said, "Chorus is always ready." Ryan said, "Let's be polite about this." He used that word in every briefing. Polite. Because what they were doing was not a war. It was not revenge, not punishment, not the kind of thing that needed to be loud. It was something much quieter and much more permanent than any of those. It was a demonstration. The difference between a dog that bites and a dog that stands completely still in your doorway and simply lets you understand, without any noise at all, what it could do if it decided to. The chorus moved. Not 47 separate ships making 47 separate decisions. One thing with 47 parts, all responding at once. No commander sending instructions down a chain. No waiting. The way a hand closes because the moment is there, and the whole body knows it. The targeting was exact. Drive systems. Weapons arrays. Communication relays. One shot per system. No second shots. The kind of accuracy that comes from watching a target for 48 hours and knowing every part of it better than the target knows itself. 4 minutes. For minutes and 17 Cat Hell warships were completely still in space. Every crew member is alive. Not one casualty. Every hull intact. But every drive was dead, every weapon was offline, every communication system was dark. 17 ships, each one worth more than most planets' annual budgets, were now 17 very expensive pieces of furniture floating in the Orion corridor. Ryan watched the display settle. No return fire. There was nothing left to return fire with. Camille looked at her screen and said, quietly, "Clean." "Yes," he said. He sat for a moment with the quiet of it. The Ardent hummed around him at its usual low frequency. The star map turned on the left screen. 46 other ships held positions across the sector, running cold, waiting. He pulled up the secondary transmission protocol. Karen had written it into the original files years ago, before any of this was real, and had called it in her notes the message that doesn't need words. Ryan had read those notes. He understood what she meant. The transmission was simple. 3 pieces of information were sent to Griff 7's command ship, the Arden's designation, the chorus total unit count, and a timestamp. The timestamp showed when the chorus had first taken up position in the sector. 48 hours ago. Before the patrol had even begun. No translation required. Numbers were the same in every language. He then opened an audio file that Nate Carver had sent down the chain 2 days earlier with a single instruction attached: transmit this after. Ryan played it for himself first, sitting still, listening. It was 11 seconds long. The first 10 seconds were a recording from the Conclave Summit Chamber, the sound of 17 species laughing, all their different noises, all their different translations of the same feeling. Someone had captured it clearly. You could hear every detail. The last second was Nate Carver's voice. Even. Flat. Completely calm. "We heard you." That was all. Ryan transmitted it to the dead fleet and then set his comm down on the console. The Arden was quiet. Camille had stopped her running commentary and was just sitting, looking at her screen. The corridor of space outside was very still and very dark and very large. After a while she asked, "Do you feel better?" Ryan thought about it properly. Not the fast way, not the way you answer when someone is just asking to be polite. The actual way. "No," he said. "But I think we said something true." She nodded. She seemed to understand what he meant, or at least understand that it was a complete answer. The chorus went dark again. Cold drives. Minimal output. Background radiation. Moving back into the between spaces, into the silence that was not emptiness but something deliberate, the specific quiet of things that choose not to be found. In the Orion corridor, 17 Qatar warships drifted without power or direction. Their crews are alive and unharmed and listening to the particular sound that space makes when nothing is answering back. Ryan ate something from a wrapper he had been ignoring for 2 days. He looked at the star map. He did not sleep. He rarely slept. But this, he thought, was the right kind of being awake. 6 days after the Oran corridor went quiet, Ambassador Lena Adler walked back into the conclave chamber and took her seat. She noticed the room before she sat down. The way it felt had changed. Not in any way you could put in a report. The same table, the same pale walls, the same gas giant visible through the long window on the west side. But in the way the air sat. In the small careful distances the other delegations were keeping from one another. In the particular stillness of beings who have recently realized they were missing important information and are now trying very hard to look as though they weren't missing it at all. Commander Nate Carver stood near the window. Hands in his pockets. Not looking at the planet. Just present, the way he was always present, filling space without making any effort to be seen in it. Vreth of the Kathar was already seated. Same position as always. 8 feet of blue-gray cartilage folded into formal diplomatic posture. Translator active and ready. But something was different about him today. Some weight was missing. The low, solid quality that is being carried when it has spent 400 years being the largest and most significant thing in most rooms. It was still there in the way he sat. It was just quieter than usual. He looked, Lena thought, like a sentence someone had removed 2 words from. Almost complete. Not quite. The formal session opened the way all formal sessions opened. Procedure first, always. Breth filed the Kthar al complaint through the established protocol, which was the correct thing to do and also the only available thing to do. He spoke for 9 minutes. He was thorough and technically accurate. 11 Kthar al warships disabled without any prior warning or formal declaration. A violation of the Conclave's peace agreements. An unprovoked action by the human fleet against a full member species in good standing. He cited 3 separate treaty clauses. He was very good at this. Lena listened to all of it without moving. She kept her hands flat on the table. She let him finish completely and then let 1 extra beat of silence pass before she spoke. She said, "When did the Kthar al become aware of our vessels?" It landed in the room like a stone dropping into water. She said it in the same voice she used for everything in these sessions, level, professional, not loud and not soft. The voice of someone who already knows the answer and is asking for the record. Breth's translator took a moment. This is not the relevant point in the discussion. For the record, please, she said. No change in her tone. No added pressure. Just the same clear, steady voice asking the same question again. The room was very quiet. The Kthar al diplomatic staff conferred briefly in their own clicking language, sounds too fast and specific for the translators to catch. Then Breth's flat translator voice returned. Our sensors registered the presence of human vessels at the point of engagement. At the point of engagement, Lena said. Not before. A pause. Not before. Thank you, she said. And how many human vessels were recorded at engagement? Another short conference. The records indicate 47 units. Lena nodded once. 47 vessels. In position for 48 hours before your sensors detected them. She let it sit in the room exactly as long as it needed to sit. That will be entered into the record. What happened next was not loud. It was the opposite of loud. It was the sound of 17 different kinds of silence from 17 different species, all of them processing the same numbers at the same time. 47 ships. 48 hours. 300 kilometers away. Never detected. She watched it move across the room the way weather moves, not visible, but felt by everything in its path. The Vorith delegates had gone completely still, their secondary membranes flat. The Serenti were looking at each other and then very deliberately not looking at each other. The beings who had spent their entire civilizational histories assuming that military power was something you could see and measure and plan around were sitting with the realization that they had been planning around the wrong thing. Counselor Ian leaned forward. He was the oldest presence at the conclave table. He had been attending sessions for longer than most of the current member species had been spacefaring. His skin was the color of old jade and he moved the way beings move when they have stopped being in any hurry about anything. He had 4 arms and he folded 2 of them on the table now in the way he did when he was about to say something that he had already thought about carefully. He said, 47 units. 48 hours. Not detected. He said it quietly and not as a question, and then he was quiet for a moment himself. Then he looked at Lena. We did not know that your kind was built for patience. Lena looked back at him. The real smile came, the rare one, not the professional one. Brief. Genuine. Gone again in a moment. We have been patient, she said, for 11 years. The room absorbed that sentence slowly. The formal session did not resolve the Cathay AL complaint. It was tabled, conclave language for set aside without any agreed outcome, which was also, in its way, a complete answer. No one asked Lena for an apology. Requesting it would have required someone to believe it would be given, and no one in that room believed that anymore. The delegations filed out afterward. Quiet conversations in their own languages. The specific sounds of beings who have somewhere private to go and something important to discuss when they get there. After the chamber had mostly emptied, Counselor Ian found Nate still by the window. Just the 2 of them and the gas giant turning in the space below. Ian said, "You built those ships before you ever sat at our table." Nate kept looking at the planet. "We have always built things like that." Ian considered that. "Because your kind was prey once." "We were prey for a long time," Nate said. A pause. "We are very good at not forgetting what that felt like." Ian was quiet for several seconds. He had the quality of someone who actually listened, which was different from someone who waited for their turn to speak. Finally, he said, "In 400 years at this table, I have met many species who claim to understand threats. They all understood the display of it. The performance." He paused. "You made no performance." "No," Nate said. "That," Ian said, "is what none of us were prepared for." He left after that. Not quickly. Ian never moved quickly, but with the clear sense of a being who had something to think about and intended to give it the time it deserved. At the door, Vreth was the last to leave the chamber. He walked past the window. He did not look at Nate. Not the careful, deliberate non-looking of someone making a point. The real thing, the simple, complete absence of looking of a being who had decided that meeting another's eyes would cost something he was not ready to spend. Nate watched him go. That, he thought, was the most honest thing that had happened in this room today. More honest than any of the words. He turned back to the window. The gas giant kept turning. Purple and gray. Patient and vast and not at all interested in what happened to the small creatures arguing in the station above it. Below, in the corridors of the conclave, 17 species were revising their models. Looking for the right folder to put humans in and finding that the folders they had were the wrong shape. That was fine, Nate thought. They had time to work it out. 6 months later, Nate Carver was home. He was sitting in a lawn chair in his backyard in Ohio, holding a glass of iced tea that had gone slightly warm without him noticing, looking at the sky. It was June. The sky in June, in this part of Ohio, turned a particular shade of pink at the edges when the sun went down. He had tried to describe it once and had not been able to. He had been to 40 star systems and looked at the skies of every planet that had one, through viewports and observation decks, and once through a cracked helmet visor that had given everything a slight green tint. None of them did the pink the way Ohio did the pink. He had stopped trying to figure out why he kept comparing things to it. He just did. His daughter Mara was on the porch behind him, her homework spread across the small table the way she always arranged things, each piece in a specific position, a system that made sense only to her and worked perfectly. She was 14. She had her mother's eyes and a stillness that she had gotten from him or invented herself, or maybe both. She did not talk about his work and had not pushed for details in the 4 years since she was old enough to understand there were details she was not being given. She looked up at some point and said, "You went out there and did something scary, didn't you?" She said it the way she said most things, directly, as if asking permission for the statement would be strange. Nate looked at his tea. "Sort of," he said. She thought about that. Did it feel good? He thought about Ryan Hollis. The star map. The protein bar. The answer. No, but true. He gave Mara the same one. "No," he said. "But I think we said something that needed to be said." She looked at him for a moment in the way she had, assessing, deciding whether the answer was complete or whether it was covering something. She seemed to decide it was complete. She nodded once and went back to her homework. 40 minutes later, Admiral Crane's transmission arrived. Nate read it in the lawn chair while the sky moved from pink to purple to the soft deep dark that came after. The Galactic Conclave had issued a communiqué. Private. Off record. Sent through the diplomatic channel to Lena Adler's office and then down to Fleet Command. In the careful, formal language the Conclave used for things it found genuinely difficult to say out loud, it acknowledged that the human fleet's classification had been changed. Not a junior observation member anymore. A new category. Crane's note said the Conclave's translation team had spent 3 days trying to find the right words for it in any human language and had not fully succeeded. The closest version was something like a recognized force of uncertain reach. Which was diplomatic language for "we do not know exactly what you have or where it is, and that fact is now part of how we think about you." At the bottom of the communiqué, there was a note from Counselor Ian. It was 4 words. "We have updated our modeling." Nate read it twice. He set the comm down on the armrest. He looked at the dark Ohio sky and thought about what it cost a being who had been doing this for 400 years to write that sentence. What it meant to sit down at a desk and rearrange what you believed to be true about another species. It was not a small thing. It was probably one of the most significant things Ian had done in a very long career, and he had done it in 4 words with no fuss about it. Nate finished his iced tea. 2 days later, he drafted his response to Yin's invitation to the regional summit, a smaller meeting, not on conclave record, the kind of conversation that happened in the spaces between the official ones. He spent longer on the response than he usually spent on any written communication, which surprised him at first and then did not. He understood what the invitation was. Not routine. Not diplomatic procedure. An acknowledgement from the one being in the chamber who had looked at something true and said it directly. His response was 3 sentences. The last one said, "We will bring the same ships." He sent it without second-guessing the wording. Mara came out that evening and found him still in the lawn chair, the empty glass beside him, watching nothing in particular. She stood near him without sitting. She was going to say something. He could tell by the way she stood. She said, "Do you think they'll ever laugh at us again?" He let the question settle for a moment. Looked at the tree at the back of the yard, the one that had been there since before he was born, the one that his father had climbed as a boy according to family stories he had no way of verifying. "Some of them will," he said. She said, "And then what?" He picked up the empty glass. "Then we go again," he said. She was quiet. She looked at him for a moment with those eyes that were a mother's, and then she went back inside without saying anything else. The screen door made its sound behind her, the sound it had made every time anyone went in or out of this house for 14 years, so familiar he usually did not hear it at all. He heard it tonight. He sat with it for a while. Out beyond Ohio, out past the stratosphere and the satellite belt and the edge of the solar system and the long dark between star systems, 47 ships held position in space. No lights. No heat. No sound. They ran so cold that the instruments of every other spacefaring civilization in the known galaxy would read them as nothing, as background noise, as instrument error, as the unremarkable static of empty space. They were not in empty space. They were waiting, the way things wait when they have all the time they need and do not feel the need to announce it. They had been built for this. Designed for it, shaped by 9 years of careful work by people who understood something that most of the galaxy had never needed to understand, that the most dangerous thing is not the thing that makes the most noise. It is the thing that makes no noise at all. That knows where you are. And has been there longer than you knew. The Ohio night settled around Nate's yard. The tree stood in the dark the way it always stood. The house behind him was warm and lit and ordinary. He set the empty glass on the arm of the chair and looked up at the sky, at the stars that were visible now, sharp and numerous and very far away. Somewhere among them, in a conclave office with 400-year-old records on its walls, a security model was being rewritten. He did not feel victorious. He felt like something old and necessary had been done, and now the world had the shape it was supposed to have. He went inside. The screen door made its sound behind him. The dark stayed exactly where it was.